Welcome, everyone. My name is Neil Popish, and I'd like to welcome you all to the virtual Las Vegas Jewish Film Festival. I am the program director with Jewish Nevada, a program director with the JCC, a division of Jewish Nevada. Special thanks to the Robinson and Frankoff families for their sponsorship and dedication to Jewish film. And thank you, Joshua Abbey, as always, and the Las Vegas Jewish Film Festival for the partnership. I'd like to thank all of our sponsors and producers of the Las Vegas Jewish Film Festival. We hope you've enjoyed our series of films and webinars over the past 8 months. And please visit the newly updated Las Vegas Jewish Film Festival website at www.lvjff.org for updates and links to past webinars. This webinar is being recorded, and you will be able to watch starting tomorrow on the Jewish Nevada YouTube page. Once our Q&A session with our panelists is completed, I will then ask questions from you, our participants. If you have a question for any of our panelists, please use the Q&A button on the bottom of your screen. We will ask as many questions as we can in the time allotted. At this time, I would like to welcome our panelists. Today we welcome Maggie Cox, middle student, Sue Dubin, Holocaust resource librarian, Mitchell Kalin, middle school teacher, and Arnold Zar-Kessler, interim head of the Adelson School. And as always, joining us to facilitate the discussion is Las Vegas Jewish Film Festival Director, Joshua Abbey.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you very much to all of our sponsors, and especially our guest panelists, Maggie Cox, Arnold Zar-Kessler, and Mitchell Kalin. Susan Dubin was pre-recorded because she was unable to join us today. And at some point in our discussion, we're going to bring her in for about 10 minutes of a pre-recorded interview I did with her. And then we'll wrap it up with everybody who's present now and open it up to everyone's questions who might have some. So I've prepared some general talking points, which I shared with everyone, and we're just going to get started. The film Live to Bear Witness is named after Elie Wiesel's gravestone epitaph, lived to bear witness. To bear witness is to share truths about events that shape the future. Have the first generation Holocaust survivors, like Elie Wiesel, succeeded in their intention to help future generations learn from the past? Maggie, do you want to start us off with a response to that? Have the survivors succeeded in their intention to teach us?
I think so. I mean, personally, in my middle school, we had a whole curriculum to learn about it. And a lot of students were very interested in it, and they even joined Holocaust Club, but they really wanted to get everything they could from our school. And I think that like interest has kept that fuel.
And were you able to have a survivor come to your classroom or see one on recorded video?
Yeah, we had panels each year, I believe, where like 3 Holocaust survivors would come and they would speak, and it was very emotional, and a lot of people were like it was interesting to see a lot of the kids that I would see goof off in class. They got serious, and some of them cried, and it's something that a lot of people they know about now.
Thank you. And your teacher in Holocaust Studies was Mitch, who's with us today, correct? And Mitch, the Holocaust Club that Maggie's referring to, tell us a little bit about that, how you started it.
Well, it started basically because I'm teaching U.S. history, and at least in middle school, teaching about the Holocaust and World War II has sort of been laughed out of U.S. history. And I wanted to be able to teach the Holocaust. So this was the best way that I felt, the best vehicle I had to be able to fully and adequately present the information to the students who wanted to learn about it. And Maggie was one of them, who was like a sponge. Maggie just absorbed everything we did, but it was just something out of necessity, because it's something I feel very strongly about. I feel an obligation, actually, to Holocaust survivors to be able to carry on what their message when they are no longer able to do so. And this is a vehicle to do it. And even for the students who weren't in the Holocaust Club, like Maggie said, every year I brought Holocaust survivors to our school. And it was just absolutely, and I did it always at night too, so families could come. And it was really incredible just to see, like Maggie said, people, multi-generations sometimes, with grandparents, with parents and children, they're all sharing this moment together. And it was incredibly effective, and just moving every year to be there. So yeah, I mean, the Holocaust survivors in Vegas are doing their best to try and keep the memory of what happened alive, and it's up to us to continue it.
Arnie, why must the lessons of the Holocaust be continually taught to each subsequent new generation?
Well, thank you. And first off, thank you for this opportunity, Josh. Thank you, Neil. I want to return first to the questions, and I think the very special answers you got from the first two. The question about were the survivors successful? The degree to which Maggie is so engaged, it means that, yes, they have succeeded. But now the question is what Mitch has kind of laid out. What are the responsibilities of the next generation, next generations thereafter? To live and bear witness, they've done. The survivors, kol hakavod, what they've done with what they've been through, one can only imagine, only appreciate their real heroism. The challenge now is, okay, so what happens? What's the responsibility of the next generation, and how do we indeed take it on? And when there's outstanding teachers like Mitch who say, literally, he said, I feel an obligation to the survivors. That's kind of how a legacy is passed on. The question, which we'll probably get to perhaps even more as we go along, is the profound special history of the Jews, which is important for the Jews themselves to be able to embrace, to understand and pass on, and for them to be able to share with others. It's both. And that's dualism about what is special for Jews about the history of the Holocaust, and what's special for Jews to make sure that others know that's special about the Holocaust is the ongoing challenge. That's one of the reasons, Josh, I have to let you know, I told you this personally, but now we're in front of people, how impressed I was with the film. Because the film itself made it clear that it's not only about the survivors teaching the lesson to Jews and the next generations of Jews, but teaching to people who might not have known. And I think your film was an outstanding example of how that legacy of getting that message out to a broader community is valuable. So I thank you for it.
Thank you so much for that feedback and that general context, the framework that you illustrate. I just need to share, in the making of the film, we recorded the survivors asking general universal questions about the values and significance of the Holocaust separately from the students. And then the students were filmed usually primarily on location at schools. There were some outdoor park venue locations. But when they were given the questions, they weren't rehearsed. They were just spontaneously, to the best of their ability, answering them. And what impressed me significantly was, even if they didn't have a lot of awareness, they had a very pronounced interest and desire to learn more. And I anticipated hearing some dissent, or some, negative impressions, or the one notion that, there's so many tragedies in the past, why does the Holocaust, stand out above the rest as somehow, more worthy of focus in education. And that leads me to my next question, which is, does the Holocaust have a unique identity that differentiates it from other acts of genocide? And should genocide and the Holocaust be taught together? And if so, how? Mitch, you want to tackle that one?
Well, I think it does. I mean, the magnitude, first of all, there hasn't been anything to that degree. And also just, I mean, the fact, and many genocides are against specific groups, but that this one was against the Jewish people. And, you know, I try and differentiate to my students that there's a difference between a genocide and a war. Soldiers die in war. The people who died in the genocide did not do anything other than being born the wrong religion, or you know, being born handicapped. You know, there were 11 total million people who were murdered during the Holocaust, 6 million who were Jewish. So I try and explain to them, these aren't soldiers who are dying in battle. These are innocent people who are murdered. So yeah, I think that the Holocaust is different and should be taught that way.
I know that a lot of programming and structure for new Holocaust museums is trying to be more inclusive of genocide in general. Arnie, what are your feelings on this subject?
Well, first off, I appreciate all the efforts that are being made for museums and investment to help people understand. But what I'm reminded of is a book that I read a bit of, a recent book called The Last Million, which is Europe's Displaced Persons from World War II to Cold War. And there's a story in it about someone who goes to Auschwitz. There was a dean of the University of Pennsylvania Law School. And he goes and he interviews people, and he's completely blown away. And talking to the survivors who basically say, look, all we want is some sort of life. We never want to have to think about this again. And he was just so profoundly moved. Yet within the Eisenhower administration, there was effectively, why would you give Jews specific, credence here? There were other people in the displaced persons camp. And in effect, what they were saying was, and you'll excuse my language here, that this was in the early years of the 1950s. Why do this special for the Jews? Because don't all lives matter? Don't all displaced persons matter? And on its face, obviously, that's a true statement. But I have to speak for myself personally. Understanding the recent months of racial unrest has enlightened me to the notion of when a population has a special story, when the narrative of their suffering is unique in some ways that supersedes others. It doesn't mean you dismiss the other people's narratives. It doesn't mean that their stories are not important, but to claim in light of Black Lives Mattering and the slavery that they went through, that there was other forms of slavery, which there were, that there are other people who have suffered, which obviously there were. To say, therefore, all lives matter is an insult to the suffering of the Blacks in this country and their history going all the way to pre-colonial days. And in a parallel vein, I would say that for the displaced persons, as David Nassau does in his book about the last millions, about the DP camps and people who survived, especially the Jews, and what it means for us Jews when we think about the Holocaust. We appreciate and respect the Armenians and all the others who might have suffered, but we own this story because it is our story. And therefore we have responsibility to make sure others understand it, not to the neglect of others, but also not to the amelioration of our unique narrative that is ours, that we own, and that we have responsibility to pass down and share with others.
Thank you, Arnie. It's beautifully expressed. Maggie, among your friends and people your age group, do you discuss the trends of different minorities who were afflicted, the Native Americans and the Blacks, and the Jews from the Holocaust and other victims of genocide and ethnic cleansing? In how is it important to you and your peers?
It is. I've actually before, I've kind of, I don't know how to explain. I had a conversation with a friend, in 6th grade about, the Japanese imprisonment. And that was a subject that was also very dear to my heart, still is. And he sat there and told me that it was all right that happened. And my goal was to show him that it wasn't. And we had a thought we had a thoughtful conversation, and he had then decided that it was not all right. And that's kind of my goal, is I'm gonna try and educate other people, and I do try and talk with other people about these things. But yeah, we do talk about it sometimes.
And can I just,
Yeah, Mitch, jump in.
to go with what Maggie just said, that's my goal as a teacher, is that not only that my students learn about the past, but they then become teachers to others and say, wait, you know, especially deniers. There's so many deniers nowadays. And I want my students to be able to say, no, you're wrong. And then to give them reasons why they are wrong. That's why it was so important to me to have Holocaust survivors come in, because my students and their families could say, no, we saw this person. This person lived through it. It's not propaganda. It's true. I still show videos of Holocaust survivors, because they could say they heard this person's story and this person was there. And like I said, we need to keep passing it forward, the knowledge. And we can only do so much, but if we educate 100 students and then they educate people, then there will be it'll be less likely that we'll have, like we have now, where 60% of the people between 18 and 30 didn't know that 6 million Jews died in the Holocaust. We need to have more education and have the people we educate others as well.
From your experience, Mitch, among your peers that are teaching about the Holocaust, you said primarily in history or social studies. Are there a lot of non-Jewish teachers, and do you see any distinction in the motivation, whether they have a Jewish heritage or not?
Well, actually, ironically, in middle school, it's really because of the change in the curriculum. It's not even part of our curriculum in social studies anymore. Where it's being taught in middle school is English classes. 8th grade, it's specifically in the curriculum. And I'm in a school where every 7th grade English teacher also does a Holocaust novel. So, and these are not Jewish teachers. Matter of fact, when I went to Israel in 2019 on that Echoes and Reflections seminar, I have 35 teachers from all over the country who participated. Only 3 were Jewish, and yet what was so cool to see was that every teacher there was just as passionate about teaching it as I was, and you know the other 2 teachers who were Jewish. So for me, it's something that's really strong because I am Jewish. But it's so nice to see other teachers who feel just as passionately about teaching it who are not Jewish.
The next question is, how do lessons of the Holocaust assist with social pressures in school, such as racism and bullying? And what role do schools play in shaping social behavior? Arnie, you want to speak to that?
That's a great question. By the way, I just want to go back, Mitch. That's a very powerful story, that you went to a seminar in which there were something like 36 people, all passionate about teaching the Holocaust, and all but 3 were not Jews. That's incredible. That's incredible. And that's, there's so much to be hopeful about, even in these very challenging times. To me, that's something to be hopeful. Besides seeing Maggie here, such a bright young woman, that's great. The role of schools, I think, schools, when they're working best and when teachers, perhaps like Mitchell, are doing their best, they're not teaching subjects of history in isolation from other contexts within history, and then finding the right opportunities, hopefully not terribly heavy-handed, to say that there's ways in which we can operate, not only within the wider world, but within our own world right here, the way in which we look at others, the way in which we look at difference. And if we can find ways to look at difference as opportunities to be able to engage, to be able to include, to be able to actually broaden ourselves, if we can do it in our own little space, our school, for example, then we can do it in our community, we can do it beyond. But it takes, I think, talented teachers, perhaps like Mitch and others, to be able to understand that this is a challenge to be able to be met that will last the lifetime, we hope, for the students in their classes.
So what is the proper training required to teach Holocaust and genocide studies appropriately? Mitch, Arnie, both?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm biased. Like I said, that seminar I did was done by Echoes and Reflections, who also has actually come to Vegas a few times and done webinars, not webinars, they've actually done presentations and classes. I think that that's the key. How can it be done effectively? So you just teach the Holocaust and you do it, you just read the novel, The Boy in Striped Pajamas. And that's it. So, okay, I spent a month on this novel and showed the movie, I covered the Holocaust. Then you're doing a disservice to teaching the Holocaust. I think it needs to be done properly, to be done effectively, to have an impact. There's so much out there which is pre-made. I know many teachers who don't know about it feel intimidated almost to teach it. But there are ready-made curriculums where you can pick and choose what you want that will enable you to teach it effectively. Like I use Echoes and Reflections. It's an amazing curriculum. You can pick and choose. This semester, I'm actually not teaching history. I'm teaching course on enrichment. So I had a month to teach the Holocaust. I've never had that. And 80% of what I used was from Echoes. And it was so great. And my supervisor came in and she said, Mitch, the kids were so engaged and you were so engaged. And it's like, it was just awesome to hear them use the terminology, because I felt confident, because I felt like I was able to do it properly. And I really think that's an important thing. I mean, teachers who teach it should teach it using the correct curriculum and not just sort of create on their own. Because like we have so much burden on us as teachers. Teachers don't want to try and look for something to do because it's like just one more thing. But what Echoes has is so easy, you don't really have to look for it. You just have to pick from their buffet, use the resources, and you can teach it effectively to students. So I guess in a long way, I've just sort of said, if you're going to teach it, make sure you do it effectively. Otherwise, it can be counterproductive.
How do teachers get in touch with Echoes?
You go to echoesandreflections.org, and they have lesson plans there. You go to teach and lesson plans, and it's just, I mean, every Holocaust Museum has it, Eyewitness has it, and they're all good. Facing History, very good. I just happen to like theirs. And to me, it's the easiest to use. They have so many great resources. They have free webinars for teachers that you can take. They're offered quite often using the teachers from Yad Vashem. It's just an amazing resource, which coming back from Israel, I feel more confident teaching it than I've ever felt in my life.
And
So
Arnie, go
I
ahead.
want to pick up on a couple of things that Mitch said, including his very last comment. Your question was, okay, how do you prepare teachers? What is it they need to have? And I'll throw out a few of the things that we can pick up directly from Mitch, because I think he's brought up a number of good points. Number one, there has to be kind of materials available, easy access, and an abundance of them that are well thought through. And Facing History being one example. I was tangentially involved when there was planning for work in Jewish day schools a number of years ago. But Mitch's key point that there needs to be availability. That there needs to be ultimately the sense that Mitch closed his comments with, which is, I feel confident about this. And so what that takes is investment. The sorts of things of being able to have webinars, seminars, bringing people to Israel, what that takes is an investment in the individual teachers. That meaning that they've got the materials that they need, they get the support that they need, they get a chance to be able to connect with others. They're often both on-site, but especially off-site, to be able to talk about Yad Vashem and to be able to talk about this. Mitch just said, look, it was great. I remember being there with this group. That's the sort of thing that transforms the teachers. In effect, the teachers need to have a transformation. For myself, I can speak personally. I dating myself, but I grew up with the friends of the family, and my friends' parents were survivors. So I got to know them. And so that was part of my growing up. But you think about Maggie and the great gift that the community of Las Vegas has afforded her and her peers is they've been fortunate enough to have survivors who want to tell their stories. That is a remarkable resource. What I'm suggesting here is that the actual teaching has to be multimodal, whether it's the novel, The Boy in the Striped Pajamas, whether it's the videos that are available, whether it's the in-person opportunities. But ultimately, it rests with the teachers who have been the beneficiaries of community investment, which Mitch has. And that's what I would say is kind of the key switch. And I bet pretty soon we're going to talk about state mandated Holocaust curriculum. And I hope you get to that before too long as well.
Oh, before you go to Maggie, can I add something?
Okay.
I wasn't endorsing The Boy in Striped Pajamas, by the way, because I actually think if that's what you do, then don't do that.
Okay.
Yeah, but I'm just saying, just use it. Many teachers I know use that as their sole teaching, right. And if you leave, the Holocaust unit, and the one thing you feel is like, oh, I feel pride for the Nazis whose child died in the gas chamber by mistake. That's the wrong message to get from learning about the Holocaust.
So
Maggie,
Maggie,
if I made that seem like I was endorsing it.
Maggie, what's the right age, in your opinion, to first learn about the Holocaust? And also the lessons of compassion and empathy and tolerance and kindness. Do you feel those messages are sufficiently being communicated in all subjects in your school experience?
Well, I mean, I personally, I had never heard of the Holocaust before 6th grade. I remember walking in for my first time to my middle school and seeing advertisements for the Holocaust Club. And I remember like whispering to my mom, "What is this?" And she said, "You'll learn when you're old enough." And I learned in 6th grade. I was fortunate enough because I was in a 7th grade English class. But I think I really benefited. I benefited from learning it earlier than the other kids because I had a better understanding by the time I was in 8th grade than they did. So I think, I don't know, a lot of things in history people lie about and they hide. Like George Washington's teeth was made out of wood. No, they weren't. And I mean, if you're not gonna talk about these events that happen, don't lie about them to kids because kids grow up thinking that. And personally, I think I could have started learning maybe in 5th grade, because this has become something I'm very passionate about. Like I'm in an internship now for it, but those are my thoughts.
Tell us about the internship. What is the internship?
USC Shoah Foundation.
And are you wearing a t-shirt?
I am. Stronger than hate.
So the second part of my question I am curious about, the important lessons of empathy and compassion and kindness and tolerance. Are those values being sufficiently communicated throughout your education in all your courses?
I think sometimes, like I've had teachers that are teaching like to be kind and like accepting, and I've had teachers that are kind of closed and they don't talk about those sorts of things. And I was fortunate enough to have mostly teachers that are very open and they want to teach. And so for me, I think yes, I have been taught like right, but I don't think a lot of other kids are as fortunate as me to get some like great teachers that I got, Mr. Kalin.
Yes, thank you, man.
When I taught my first 12 years, I taught 5th grade, and my second year there is when I met Lydia Leibovic, who is a Holocaust survivor, and she transformed everything for me. Made me, anyone who met her became changed. And I used to tell people that I get paid by the CCSD to get good CRT scores. But to me, what I'm teaching is to make my kids leave my class as a better person. That's always been a goal of mine. And teaching the Holocaust, if you do it right, not only do you teach them history, but you also teach them empathy. And if they leave your class with empathy, then they leave as a better person, which is just as important as the historical aspect of it.
Okay, before we cut to Sue, who's going to talk about the state of Holocaust education in Nevada and about nationally states that mandate it, let's get our feedback here. Should Holocaust education and genocide studies be mandated into the curriculum for all middle and high schools across America? Arnie?
I tell you that's a tough one because I'm not actually a good judge about the curricula across the country. What I can say is that I think it's the duty of each local school body that decides to recognize the importance of the narratives of the peoples within our broader community, and to find ways to be able to include it. I think that the lessons of the Holocaust, both for those peoples, for the Jews, and for the wider population, for gay people, for people of other differences, I think is profound, and I would encourage them to do it. I don't know if this is the sort of thing that would come from a new Department of Education. Frankly, I would be a little skeptical of that. But I would hope that places like the school districts in Nevada, Clark County School District, for example, would recognize the compelling reason that this narrative needs to be included, have a place, and the lessons that are learned from it means that people hear the story and hear the narrative, and that children in subsequent generations learn it. So I would say for those places that are within the purview that I know, I would say yes. For the wider ones, I hope they would act responsibly.
We're going to hear now from Susan about the history of Holocaust education in Nevada. Like I said, it's about 13 minutes. I would like to request that the panelists stay with us so that when we come back, we'll have about 10 more minutes before we close it out. Neil, are you able to cut to Susan's recording?
Hi, Josh. Nice to see you.
Yes, thank you so much for joining us. Let's start off by sharing with everyone a little bit about the work that you do, your title, and I know you just are in the midst of moving the Holocaust Resource Library, so we really appreciate you finding the time in the big move to Temple Beth Shalom. But just orient us a little bit about who you are and what you do in the Las Vegas community.
I am the library consultant for the Sperling Kronberg Mack Holocaust Resource Center and the Governor's Advisory Council on matters relating to Holocaust education. And I'm an educational consultant as well. So at the library, I work as the librarian there. I organize all of the materials, check books in and out, hopefully at some point in future when we can do that again. I organize all of the web pages for us. And most importantly, I teach professional development courses to the teachers in Clark County School District. And all of my courses are online and available throughout the state of Nevada for credit as well.
Fantastic. And how many years have you been doing this in Las Vegas now?
I've been working with the Resource Center since 2012, and I've been actually teaching classes for the last 3 years. And as of last January, before we went out because of COVID, the school district had told me that we had 1,100 teachers take our classes.
Who've come through the, what's it called, PPE, right?
PDE, professional development.
Which they're required to, but that's a selective on their part. So 11,000 have chosen it and been processed and are now more qualified to teach Holocaust education.
Correct. And of those teachers, 25 of them have taken 5 or more classes, and the Resource Center and the Governor's Council have certified them as Holocaust educators. So they in turn can teach classes as well.
And that includes Mitchell Kalin, who's with us today as part of our panel. Correct. So let me ask you a few questions, since we're recording you separately from the session, since you had a conflict on the 18th. First of all, in relation to the film Live to Bear Witness, what did you think about the unique approach in so much as having survivors ask the questions and letting students answer those questions extemporaneously?
I thought it was a very, very good idea. It's always good to get feedback on what students know and when they've learned it and where. And your film actually gave us a lot of information.
Given the concerning statistics of the growing ignorance among youth, why is all the effort to provide Holocaust education in schools not providing the desired results?
Well, mainly because it hasn't been done enough. And the more that we offer courses for teachers, the more students will be exposed to information. It's been within the last 4 years that there have been questions on the advanced placement exams about the Holocaust. And because of that, many teachers are now coming to the realization that they need information. Plus, there's been a lot of information on the media about the Holocaust. And so teachers feel a need to actually look for that kind of information so they can share it with their students. It's not required in the Nevada state standards specifically. There is a section which talks about teaching about genocides, and it sort of falls under that.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about the relationship between the Holocaust and genocide in general, in how that's differentiated in social studies and history in most teachers' minds.
It's, for many teachers, it's considered one of the many genocides that have occurred. However, most of the research shows that the Holocaust and understanding the Holocaust helps students with an understanding of other genocides and what prejudice and discrimination can eventually lead to.
So I read that in October last month of 2020, the Arizona State Board of Education officially added instruction on the Holocaust and other genocides to the public education curriculum. With fewer first-generation survivors capable, due to their advanced age, of being able to do in-person classroom visits, why is a similar initiative not currently being pursued in Nevada public schools?
It actually is in discussion stages. However, we don't have a mandate to teach, but unlike most of the states, we actually have in the legislature, there is actually a designation for Holocaust education through the Governor's Council. And the Governor's Council was actually formed late 1979, early 1980, and we have been offering Holocaust education since that time period. Now, one of the differences between our state and other states that are mandating Holocaust education is that up until just recently, because of COVID, we were funded to teach teachers about the Holocaust. Many of the states that have mandates have a mandate, but they don't have any money. So even though it says that they are supposed to teach, many of them are not teaching effectively. And unfortunately, one of the issues that's missing from many of the mandates is the requirement for teachers to first have Holocaust education so they can then impart it to their students. You can't just say you have to teach Holocaust education and not have any teeth in there for what happens if you don't and how teachers are going to get the information to teach it.
Do you have any knowledge yet of what the impact of the state budgetary cuts are going to have on the Governor's Council? And is there a way that people can help support the Governor's Council budget independently?
Unfortunately, because of the huge hit that the state of Nevada took because of COVID, the Governor's Council funding through 2022 is completely been cut.
Totally?
Totally. We have zero from the Governor's Council till 2022. We are putting in a request for funding starting in 2022, but until then, we're sort of relying on whatever donations we can get. Now, the Jewish Nevada has given us a generous donation, and there are some individuals who have donated funding as well. I just am turning in a grant application for small museums, and we qualify as a small museum because of our artifacts that we have on display. But that funding won't begin until September if we do get it. So
Are teachers able to still be involved? Can they still apply to take the PDE credits? I mean, are you able to provide that even without the funding over the next 2 years?
for next year, I was just told by the Governor's Council that they have raised enough funds for me to teach 7 PDE classes in the spring and 4 in the fall for this coming year. So yes, those classes will be available. I'm hoping that maybe if I get the grant, that will cover me to teach even more classes in the fall and ongoing through the coming spring semester.
And those classes take place in the Holocaust Resource Library, which is now at Temple Beth Shalom, correct?
They did when we were teaching classes in person, but Clark County has said that no classes can be taught in person for professional development through June at least.
Because of the
Because
health
of
concerns.
COVID.
Of course.
So all of the classes are taught online.
And again, if the public viewing this program or learning about the lack of funding for the work you're doing wants to participate, how should they reach out to try and support you?
They can make donations to Jewish Nevada earmarked for the Holocaust Resource Center, and any funding that we can get help with will go towards additional programming from the Resource Center and also from the other centers that we have around the state.
Okay, I'd like to conclude with a question I didn't prepare you for.
Okay.
But big picture, long term, how do you see the evolution and effectiveness of Holocaust education beyond the first generation survivors who are quickly passing, and the receptivity of public education curriculum and administrators to control that, and government resources? Where are we going, Susan?
There have been some really wonderful technical developments, especially through the Shoah Foundation, where they have started to perfect 3D visual imaging. One of our local survivors actually has been part of that, Ben Lesser, and his is available for free online. The Shoah Foundation has just announced that they are making some of theirs available as well. And what it is you can connect to a survivor that is either alive or maybe no longer alive, and they appear in front of you as if they are actually in the room with you, and you can ask them any question and they will answer it. It's really amazing. It's like having them right there with you. I don't know the way they do it, but I think that it is definitely one of the areas that we will explore in the future. The other area is that many of the second and third generation now are learning how to share their parents' stories. And so even though it's not the immediate connection with the survivor, it is a really close connection because the second generation and even the third generation have these stories that they are saving and that they are able to pass down.
And of course, Ben is featured in the short film, Live to Bear Witness. And I just want to thank you for the work that you do on behalf of the survivor community, on behalf of the Jewish community, on behalf of the broader community. And part of the goal I was hoping to achieve with this film was to show how keeping the memory alive is not just for the Jewish community, it's for everyone, you know, all ethnic groups, all age groups, and especially important for young people to gain an appreciation of preserving this knowledge and being part of the continuity for future generations. So thank you so much, Susan, for participating.
Thank you. Thank you for all the work that you do, Josh. We really appreciate you.
Okay, and we're back. Maggie, what's your gut feeling about the future in relation to this subject and young people's ability to overcome all of the hardships we're facing now and the challenges? Are you generally an optimist, or what's your prospects on where your generation is going to take us?
I'm optimistic. It's not gonna be the same. Like I know, and I am very lucky that I got to meet a lot of first generation survivors, and that's something I'll always remember. And my goal is just to educate other people. And if I can educate other people and they educate other people, then that's my main goal. But I feel positive that we can carry on what has been done.
Thank you for that. That's exactly what we need to hear right now. We really appreciate your willingness to pursue that. It's very encouraging. So I have one last sort of general philosophical question, and then we'll open it up. I wrote, what is the appropriate balance in retaining individuals' ethnic and cultural heritage while also assimilating into the homogeneous mainstream society? In other words, how do you teach an equilibrium for this complex differentiation? How do we retain our cultural identity and yet assimilate into the mainstream culture? Or what's your impression, Mitch, on that?
How I maintain it as a Jew or how I teach it?
Well, you know, it's important to maintain your knowledge of your cultural heritage. And from my observation, that tends to, you know, group people into niche communities. And yet there has to be this exchange and, you know, intermingling between all of the subgroups into the larger group. So intellectually, how do you help students that might, you know, feel a struggle in that way to do both? Arnie, you want to jump in while you ready? Yeah. You're muted, Marty. Arnie, you're mute.
Yeah, I'm sorry, beg your pardon.
Okay.
What you've posed is something of a fundamental question, and I'm very glad you did, because it goes kind of to the core of kind of what identity means in a contemporary world, in a postmodern world. And I would suggest to you that there's a school of thought that says when one is more secure and more deeply aware and more committed to their own narrative and to the narrative of where they've come from, then they're more ready to hear those narratives of others. And the word you used, perhaps it was by design, perhaps not, of assimilation, I would say for many folks is not necessarily the goal. The goal is to find ways to be able to be authentic and to be respectful of others in their authenticity. And I would suggest to you the way to do that is to enable first for every young person to be able to learn their story, but to hear authentically and firsthand, the way Maggie speaks about listening to the Nitzalei Shoah, the survivors of the Shoah, to be able to take in that story enables one to be a citizen, as you mentioned, the future. And that's why I think we have all good reason to be hopeful, is if we could help folks, as you indicated in the film, folks who are able to kind of live their lives, grow up healthy and strong, and be able to respectfully understand the profound stories and perhaps the profound suffering of others, I think we've got a pretty good crack at this, honestly. Now, friends, I'm sorry I have to say that I do have to run. This has been a privilege. I thank you all very, very much. Mitchell, it's been a pleasure to meet you. Maggie,
pleasure to hear you.
and Josh, thank you so very, very much. I've got another meeting I've got to run to. Thank you all very, very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. So Neil, let's, in the last remaining minutes, open it up to any questions, which I'm assuming there are some, or comments. You're muted. You're muted.
Sorry, there are no questions right now. So if you have any questions, participants, please share them in the Q&A. So Josh, if you have any other questions in the meantime to ask Maggie.
Well, let's read the comment from Sandra Getz. She says, as an educator having taught in Las Vegas, New York, Boston, Columbus, and now Portland, Oregon, where Holocaust education is mandated, I feel it is a very difficult subject to teach and learn about, especially very traumatic for everyone, especially for very young children. I am Jewish, so I learned from my family. I am fourth generation survivor. I am next generation survivors and Jewish Sunday school. At Sunday school, they would show newsreel from the Holocaust, which was very horrifying. On behalf of the teachers, it should be taught. If it is mandated, it has to be taught, and educators get in trouble if it is not taught. I think other ethnic groups, such as Armenians, would want to have their genocide represented. I feel it needs to be taught in a way that young learners can understand it without being terrified and getting nightmares, if this is possible. So I did have a last question. It had to do with identity and victimization. I know in Israel, for example, after high school, most students are encouraged to travel to Europe and visit the camps with guides, of course, and educators. And it's quite traumatic for many of them, even though they've learned about it, to actually have the firsthand real experience of, being on site. And then they come back, and shortly thereafter, they're indoctrinated. They're required to serve in the army, in the Israeli army. And this sense of being a victim, a victimization, from the history, from their people's history, is that a stigma that has to be discussed? Is that a factor in giving people the confidence and their authenticity, as Arnie was describing, to not primarily identify themselves as victims, but to appreciate the history of victimhood that their people had endured?
Well, if I could just add something, all the soldiers also have to spend time at Yad Vashem.
Sure.
When I was there, we saw all the classes going through. So that's something that every soldier does. I mean, while they may be encouraged to go to the camps in Europe, every soldier has to spend, I don't remember how much time it was, but a certain amount of time learning at Yad Vashem. Because when we took the tour of the actual museum, an Israeli soldier followed us the whole time because our lead teacher was so good that she just wanted to hear the stories. But every soldier there does have to do that, to try and let them know this is something you need to be aware of. This is one of the things you're fighting for, to defend this history.
And Maggie, did you ever have reservations or concerns about how graphic the information related to the Holocaust sometimes is? And do you think it's necessary?
I mean, just my opinion, and yeah, it can be graphic, but that's what happened. And I think it's important that we know the whole story instead of kind of the PG version. And maybe that's just me, but and I know some kids from my school feel differently, and they had maybe a harder time than I did. But those are my views.
And actually, Josh, I try and avoid the graphic stuff. Like my kids never see any of the pictures that Sandra referred to in Sunday school. I mean, I still remember seeing the newsreels when I was in Sunday school, and I don't show my students anything remotely close to that. Because the one thing that they told us beginning of the Echoes class at Yad Vashem was, if you horrify the students at the beginning, you've lost them. And that's something I take to heart. I've always taught that way. I don't want them to be horrified by the topic, because then they shut down. And you can't reach them, you can't change them as people. So I think it's really important that teachers do teach it, that they don't feel that they somehow have to show these horrendous graphic pictures. Because if they do, they'll be causing, I think, more harm than help as far as educating the students.
Let me clarify a little bit about what I was saying in relation to victimization. I think it is essential that we understand the victimhood in order to overcome it. We have to realize that we were victimized in order to find the means to no longer be victimized. And Maggie, I agree with you that the truth is the truth, and the truth has to be shared in its totality for it to have any value and strength in being effective in helping us learn.
I mean, I think if you were to show more, or if teachers or educators were to show more graphic images and stories, I think that that's a choice that you would need to make, is if you want to see everything. Because I know some kids couldn't take that, but I think that it should be a choice.
Well, on that profound words of wisdom, I want to thank you, Mitch and Maggie, so much. You guys are fantastic, and I wish you a speedy pandemic, and that we come together on the other side soon. And Neil, thank you, and the JCC, and thank you everyone for participating. Have a good evening. We're going to show a preview of our next movie. Well, here's the card for supporting the Governor's Council. And then we're going to show a preview of Shepherd, the story of the Jewish dog, which is our film in December. What's the date, Neil?
December 16th, and then we will have the film will be available to be viewed from December 13th through the 16th. And if you register for the webinar, we will make sure that you receive that link, and it also will be on the ldjff.org website.
And I wanted to say one thing before we started. This is a film that's also about the Holocaust, but it's designed for families and young people to learn about the Holocaust. It's the story of a Jewish dog, and the director of the film and the young boy who stars in it will be participating in the webinar in December. So please take advantage of it. This is the preview, and then we'll say goodbye.
I know. It's hard.
What shall we name this one?
What about Caleb?
Welcome to the world, little Caleb.
There is danger forming around us.
Jews are no longer able to own pets. Blitz will be your name.
Why do you pray so much? If there were a God, he would not let this be happening to us.
The important thing is that I can hear their prayer.
would I do without you, Caleb? Just us now.
Like, subscribe.
Okay, fantastic. Good night, everyone. See you
Bye,
back
Maggie.
next month.
Bye, Joshua.
Bye-bye. Thanks, Mitch. Thanks, Maggie.